All right, hi everyone. So, how many of you have played the game of life before? The game of life. All right, so I used to play it a lot when I was little with my brothers and my dad, and every time, without fail, we would go the college path. And after our 10-day excursion and $120,000 of debt, we would try and get like one of the flashy careers, like the doctor or the lawyer. But every now and then, my dad wouldn't take that path, and we were always so confused. We were like, Dad, like, what are you doing? You could never win. And somehow he figured out how to beat us anyway, probably because we're in second grade, but, no grudges there or anything. So we were always so confused. And I was looking back at it a couple weeks ago and thinking about it, and I realized that maybe he was doing that to show us that you don't have to follow that path, that everyone has something to add to society, no matter who they are or what their skill set is. So with that in mind, what is intelligence? How do we define it? It's exceptionally hard, and psychologists everywhere have been trying for years to reach a consensus, but they haven't yet. And to me, I guess what intelligence really is about is the ability to learn and to adapt. So that's pretty broad, especially when you consider all that encompasses. And I tend to think of intelligence as not just one little thing that you are, but as a whole spectrum of things and a whole group of things that it is made of. So here in school, we're used to thinking about intelligence one way, tests. From when you're little, you take ERBs, PSSAs, PSATs, SATs, ACTs, APs. It seems like the acronyms never end. But we're so much more than tests. You're not just the sum total of filling in bubbles. That's not who you are. And we have to think about that. So why do we still measure ourselves this way if these tests don't even have a high predictive validity? So they're trying to measure how you'll do in college, but most SATs don't really predict your future grades. So when we look at it, it's really just about one presumption, that there's one thing that intelligence is, one thing that underlies everything that we are. And that's Charles Spearman's theory, that this general intelligence, or G, is a factor underlying every aspect of your intelligence. Now, I find there's a flaw with this theory. Take a look at savants, people who have below average IQs, but one specific island of intelligence. So Kim Peek, the Rain Man, he can remember 98% of everything he's ever read, and he can read 2 pages at once using each of his eyes, but he can't button his shirt. Or Alonzo Clemens, after being flashed one 2D image, he can replicate it perfectly in a 3D sculpture. He can't tie his shoe. Take Ellen Boudreau. She was born blind, and she's never seen the light of day. But she can play the piano perfectly. You can play her a 40-minute piano recital, and she'll do it without making a mistake. Or there is Stephen Wiltshire, who, taken up in a helicopter and shown a city skyline, can do it perfectly. But he didn't speak until he was 9 years old. So clearly there's a flaw with our view of general intelligence. Perhaps we're not considering other things that are so important in our everyday life and that we can be intelligent in, like emotional intelligence or creative intelligence, social, cultural intelligence. You're so much more than just your IQ. So with that, that's why I prefer multiple intelligence theories. So Howard Gardner had 8: musical, rhythmic, mathematical, logical, visual, spatial, verbal, linguistic, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. With these 8 theories, he accounts for our different aptitudes in everything, while still acknowledging that G may underlie things. So you could have some factor that underlies your abilities in all these areas. However, you could be a savant, and you could have one specific area where you're strong. Or people with brain damage who lose their ability to speak could still do complex mathematical problems under this theory. And then there's Robert Sternberg's theory. It's a triarchic theory with 3 different components: practical, analytical, and creative intelligence. Analytical intelligence is the type of intelligence we hear about all the time here in school. It's your tests, it's your grades, it's all the exams you've ever taken. It's the status quo. But there's also creative intelligence, which is your ability to respond to novel situations. So, for example, if I asked you, how many uses can you think of for a brick? How would you respond? Anyone? What can you do with a brick? Yeah? You could build with it, that's true. Yeah? You can throw it, I guess so. Anyone else? Yeah? Break stuff with it? All right. Yep. You could grind it down to something more useful. So there are an infinite possibilities with a brick. You could dress it up and make it a pet, like a pet rock. You could stand on it to make yourself a little taller. You could do as many things as you could possibly think of. And that's your creative intelligence, looking at something from a different point of view and finding a new way to use it. Practical intelligence is the street smarts we think about all the time. So it's acknowledging that in everyday life, you can go 1,000 different directions to get to the same place. There are multiple solutions for everything. And practical intelligence acknowledges that. So with these theories, I find they make so much more sense than just limiting ourselves to one thing. My parents have always told me, you know, you could be a super successful diplomat or businessman or something, but you would be completely and utterly useless if you were to be an electrician or a plumber. I know that if a pipe leaks in my house and water is running down the walls and pooling on our basement floor, I am completely useless. I have no idea how to solve that, so I call someone who understands that type of thing better than I do, who has a different intelligence than me. And that's incredibly useful. So there's another type of intelligence that's often neglected, your emotional intelligence. Now, not all psychologists acknowledge emotional intelligence as an actual form of intelligence, but for my purposes, I like to think of it as such. Now, what exactly is emotional intelligence? It's the ability to perceive, manage, understand, and use emotions. Pretty straightforward. Now, without realizing it, you are constantly taking in emotional information. You are processing all the people around you to be more socially and self-aware. So, for example, you might notice someone's quavery hands or shaky voice before a presentation to indicate they're nervous. Or even the placement of a hand can indicate you're very interested in something or completely indifferent about it. Our body language expresses so much more than we consciously understand. And the ability to read other people is completely invaluable, and another way by which we can be intelligent. So I've been talking a lot about the different forms of intelligence, and you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with me? Well, what we can think of is that intelligence isn't rigid, it's flexible. You grow smarter every single day you're in school, and your IQ increases by an average of 2 or 3 points a year. Your intelligence can be influenced by your education, your environment, your nutrition. Now, some things you can't control, like your genetics, which does have a factor in intelligence, but instead of looking at what we cannot control, we should focus on what we can control, our outlook. If you focus on intelligence as something you can learn and grow, it'll help you exponentially in life. And we should be evaluating people holistically, not just based on one aspect of their intelligence. So Robert Sternberg, the same Robert Sternberg, who had his triarchic theory of intelligence, has been testing his theory at Tufts University for their admissions process. Now, if you're at all familiar with their process, it's a little bit different than most colleges. So while they still look at SAT scores and grades, they also evaluate your supplement a little bit differently. So for example, their prompts might include a creative prompt, like make an ad for this product, post it on YouTube, and that'll be part of your supplement. Or for an analytical prompt, it might ask you what your favorite song is and why. For a practical prompt, it might ask you to convince your friend of something that they otherwise might not believe. And in doing this, he's tested his theory and he's proven that it's a better indicator of academic and non-academic success than any test score ever could be. And it's also not racially biased or ethnically or culturally biased, like most IQ and SAT tests are, because people have different backgrounds. So he's found no ethnic divisions within the admissions process using this method. So perhaps in the future, we will grow to be evaluated on more than just a paper intelligence or a test. Because we're all different and we all think differently. It's what's gotten us from being Neanderthals to having light bulbs and to having pyramids, the Mona Lisa, theory of evolution, and iPhones, and everything in between. It's what's made us put a man on the moon, because people dared to be different, dared to embrace their own individual brand of intelligence, and decided to just be themselves. So thank you.